All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jake Pass. I am the president of Davidson College Associate Chapter of Lambda Theta Phi, Latin Fraternity Incorporated. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Really wanted to take tonight to spotlight the intersectionality of identities in the Black community and Latinx communities, and how just give us really spotlight for people with those identities that oftentimes are erased on both sides, and just give a general way to express your guys' feelings. I also wanted to note that this is no way a way of educating people on everything there is to know about Afro-Latinos and Afro-Latinidad. This is just a way to increase awareness, and I encourage everyone to go and do the work. That there's a lot of readings out there. I really encourage you guys to engage with them and not just read them, to learn and educate yourselves more. But I introduced myself, so if you guys can go and introduce you guys. Anyone wants to go first?
I guess I'll take it, right?
Yeah.
My name is George Reed, better known as Negros Party. I work for Univision Radio, La X 96.3 Ritmo de New York, and I'm a proud brother of Lambda Theta Phi.
My name is Rayshawn Floyd Bennett. I'm currently a senior at University of Hartford Upsilon chapter, and I crossed Spring 19, and I'm studying architecture.
I am Luis Toledo. I recently graduated Davidson College. I joined Spring 19, and while I was there, I was in psychology and also an educational policy and human development major as well.
It's a lot.
Yeah, his major is quite a mouthful. But yeah, so I would like to start off this conversation about really wanting to ask you guys, like, what does the word Afro-Latino mean to you guys, and see what that really, I know there's a dictionary definition, but that doesn't really allow everyone to interpret how their own identity is. So let's see what you guys, how you guys feel, like, what does it mean to be Afro-Latino?
I'll go first. Honestly, I like being Afro-Latino. Like, it's a mixture of both best of both worlds. My dad is African American. My mom is also African American, but she's also Puerto Rican. So I get the mix of both cultures. And my family, honestly, we are more touched with our African side, not that much of our Puerto Rican side. Like, my mom knows Spanish, her grandma knows Spanish, but I don't really know Spanish. And I take it upon myself because I also grew up in Union City, New Jersey. And if you know that area, it's very high, dense population of Spanish people. Like, my high school was 90% Hispanic, but I don't really know Spanish, but I feel like Spanish people and Black people, they kind of go hand in hand. Like, they both kind of went through the same struggles. They kind of look the same way from the outside in, and they can relate to each other very well. So I like being Afro-Latino.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, it's just a way of, I think when I moved to the States when I was 14 with my family, and the term Afro-Latino wasn't as like coined as it is now. So like, I think when I arrived at that, I like at Afro-Latinidad, I think I kind of arrived home, because I think for me, sometimes it was easier to identify like myself as Latino while I was living in Miami, but it was more about the fact that I couldn't really find something that really defined my whole identity. Like, I was very much aware of like, yeah, like me and like some white Latinos or brown Latinos, like, yes, like we're all Latinos, but like there's something different about me. There's a different way in which society is going to see me. So Afro-Latinidad, I feel like I arrived at home because it encompassed my identity, the way I interact with society, the way society views me, the way that I was raised, the way that my dad particularly educated me.
Yeah, so George, we're still on the first question. Glad that you can make it back. On,
yeah, sorry, I think the internet. I think I might have forgotten to say it
here. But yeah, it happened.
But you know, the crazy thing about the word Afro-Latino is that I don't recall really hearing this while I was in high school, while I was in college, right? I think once I graduated, that's when it was a bit much more common. So and I think the brother just said it before. I definitely knew like I was Latino, but there was something different about me, right? But I think when I hear the word Afro-Latino, I feel like it's someone who's educated, someone who knows like the roots of where they come from. And I think a lot of us tend to fall into the I just believe what I'm told, and I just kind of don't question a lot of things, right? So I think once I hear somebody talk about Afro-Latino and Latinx, I think that's someone who's getting educated into like the roots of where they come from and who they really are.
Yeah, very true, very true. The next question I wanted to pose, because I feel like a lot of times when people see someone who's Afro-Latino, they immediately just try to categorize them into one group, and that might depend on how they look. So I wanted to ask, how was your experience being a Black man and being Afro-Latino, all these different things? How has that experience been in Lambda and being a Latin fraternity?
So I mean that's a very loaded question, right? So when you talk about being a Black Latino, right? I live in Newark, New Jersey, and for those who don't know, the population here is African American for the most part, at least on the side that I live at, and I kind of blend into the crowd, So when people see me, they just kind of kindly assume like he's just one of us, until they kind of hear me open my mouth and they're like, okay, wait, that's a poppy, right? And when you think about being part of a Latin fraternity, I think the one thing that the other fraternity didn't offer to me that Lambda did was that it was something so dear near to my culture. It was stories of the past that people had struggled that I could relate to, and I think I've been lucky to not have faced any adversity when it comes to like the color on my skin in Lambda Theta Phi. But I'm pretty sure, in other states and in other parts of the country, I think some people might be easily targeted, especially when we rock these letters, kind of like, oh, hey, I'm here. So, I think I personally haven't had a bad experience. I could say that. I think this definitely has made my experience that much better, and I think has added value to like me wanting to be very like proud Black Latino.
Honestly, one of the things that really made me want to join Lambda Phi Life Fraternity was I embrace my Afro side a lot more than my Hispanic side, my Puerto Rican side. And so me joining, and once I saw that we were able to get on campus, I saw that was a way of me actually getting more in touch with my Hispanic side. And that's really what drove me to joining the fraternity. And then once I joined it, honestly, I felt a lot more growth in myself and in touch with my culture, knowing I'm surrounded by a lot of Latin people that can actually help me grow and teach me Spanish and get me more in touch with my culture. So I love being Black in a Latin fraternity.
Yeah, overall for me is I think like I guess the story is a little bit different in the sense like I had the opportunity of being a founding brother for a chapter, so I saw that opportunity there of like creating kind of like a chapter that had the ability of encompassing all these different identities and that had a new kind of revamped definition of Latinidad, like a definition of Latinidad in which we all fit. And I think that's something that has really defined my experience as a brother of Lambda. the fact that it is a space that allows me to embrace all these things that make me who I am.
Awesome. For this next question, I basically, I'm curious as to know, how have your guys' intersecting identities influenced how you feel during this time of racial injustice and police brutality, a lot of what's going on in the media? How do you guys feel supported by your communities? I know, for instance, the Latin community in general is very anti-Black and has a lot of strong history of being that way. And it's a lot of history that needs to be unlearned. And I want to know how you guys been supported by all of your communities.
So I was actually having this conversation with a few of my friends, right? So and I don't know if you guys know, but especially on this part of the states, in uptown New York, there was this conversation about Dominicans being racist, right? And I think our cultures have I called it subliminal racism in it, because I don't think it's blatantly out there with the malicious intent to kind of segregate someone or kind of put them in a different, not I want to say different category, because we do, but just I don't think it's with a malicious intent, but that we do it. For example, right? So in the Dominican culture, there's a lot of thing about el moño malo, right? Where we appreciate more the European styled hair than the one that is actually really, really, really curly, right? And if you're an immigrant Dominican in the United States, right, the word cocolo usually isn't followed by a good verb, right? It's usually followed by something negative. And this big thing about mejorar la raza, these are things that I think in the Dominican culture that there's there, and I think they're just things that are passed down, and people just kind of like this is what I was taught, and they don't question it, right? And like I was saying before, once people start educating themselves, they start understanding that we do have these African roots, and it's funny to me that sometimes people don't know it, because they know the history of us being conquered and being enslaved to the Españoles, and having all of Taínos that died because they couldn't keep up with the labor that the Españoles were asking for, and that's when a lot of these slave Africans came to these islands, and I like to, just a little parentheses here, the only difference between a Dominican, a Cuban, a Puerto Rican, and an African American in the United States, it's a different boat stop. Those are all the same slaves from Africa. They just were taken to a different spot. So when you talk to me, how do I feel about this time and this identity? The crazy thing about this is that I personally don't feel like I can relate, because I don't think I've ever been scared for my life when I've been stopped for a cop. I've never been, treated injusticely by, an officer, Do I also think that I've placed myself in very good positions so that I'm not? Yes. But I don't think I've ever feared that, So, I think I'm more here to support, and I'm more here to educate the Latinos on, what's currently going on and the injustice that is happening in this country, And I think that's really my role when it comes to everything that's going on.
How I feel about the community. So I'm kind of like the opposite of him. I actually have been racially profiled before, just because I have dreads and I'm African American. I can't tell you how many times I have gone to a party where I automatically get asked if I have drugs, just literally because I'm Black and I have dreads. It's actually insane. And honestly, during a time like this, we really have to come together. We have to put all that aside and support this movement strongly, because it is a lot of people like me out here in this world that really need that support. And knowing my mom is a single Black mom right now with three other Black sons in this world, I know that she has to pray so hard every day, knowing at any moment my life or any of my brother's life can be taken away if we act a certain way out of normal than other people. Like, we have to act. She has preached to us so many times that in certain situations, there's some things we can't do that other people can do. And honestly, it was hard growing up knowing that. And I could give you guys one story how me and my brother and a couple of my cousins actually were going to just a corner store, and the clerk stopped us right at the door and said, "You guys have to come in one by one," literally because he was scared that we would rob his store. And at the time, I was only like 11 or 10, and my older cousin was like 15, and he made it clear to us that we were never going to go back to that store again. At the time, I didn't really get it, but now looking back at it, I understand. Like, he just straight up racially profiled all of us from going into the store like one by one just by our skin color. Like, we're just young kids trying to get like a juice on a hot day, and that's just something we have to deal with. And honestly, it's tiring seeing time after time, like, we do these marches, we do these rallies, and it feels like nothing is gonna change. But I don't know. Now though, it does feel like it is changing, because this is kind of the first time during this movement where all 50 states are part of it, and we even have outside countries being part of the movement. I would say I definitely think it's because of quarantine. Like, people have more time and have more time to go out and protest. But I just gotta say, we gotta keep this going strong. Like, this is not a trend. Like, my life being a Black man is not a trend. Like, we have to keep this going, and we have to keep pushing.
Very
That's
true.
just what I have to say.
Yeah, overall, I think there are just these differences in how like I entered the movement. It's just the fact that they're in American culture and like Latino culture, you know, there's just different like sense of like racial awareness. Um and I think like when you enter American culture, there's definitely going to be this um divide in the way that the system sees you uh, because of the color of your skin. And sometimes I think I don't necessarily want to say that Hispanic parents are ill-equipped, but they just don't have this, I guess, historical knowledge of like this is how you're going to be viewed. So maybe they don't necessarily prepare you for that. Um, and I feel like that's in a sense of how I felt, particularly just because of my family living in Miami, the way that they um, race and color is perceived it is a little bit different. But I guess like when you go out there, and particularly me moving to college in North Carolina, where you go to like real America, um, just trying to explain to my family of like, well, these are the realities of how like we live, and these are the realities of how you interact with people, and like how you might find some people that have never met a Black person in their life. Like, I don't know how. Um, and I think it yes, like overall, there is a sense of like how there is systemic um racism, and there can be somewhat of a blanket reality in the US. But at the same time, like I think what is really important is that regardless of like your race and your background, you have a very situated knowledge, and then you live in pockets of like different and depending on where in the country we live in different pockets of realities. And I think something that we really need right now, even within like Afro-Latinos, within Black people in general, is like, I guess like George was saying, like that ability kind of like to transcend beyond like my reality and how my race has played into like how race has played into our lives, and understanding that there are people in different parts of the country like live in different realities. And I think that's what's really, really necessary right now.
Yeah, I agree. For this next question, I wanted to ask, how does your identity inform and influence how you approach conversations about race, or share your experiences about that? Because I know a lot of the time US culture likes to pit black versus white, or like Hispanic or Latino versus white, or all these different things. But when we're talking about Afro-Latinos, there's like the intersectionality like I'm always emphasizing of. So how do you guys think that your identity influences how you talk about these things?
I think, you know, once again, I think first is being educated about, where do your roots come from? Right? Had you asked me this question when I was like in college, I would have argued with you 100% that there is no racism in the Dominican Republic, that there is no such thing as, Afro-Latino, because that wasn't the education that I had at the moment, right? I was just under the impression, because it was what I was taught, that I was just Dominican, and that was it. I was Dominican and I was Latino. That was it. But I think once you start educating yourself and you start seeing, and you start actually analyzing the information that you're observing, and you're just not absorbing it, you start seeing, where you're from, and how things work in the world, right? Which then allows you, to kind of manage certain conversations, and when it comes to this conversation, right? I think, I know racism's out. I know racism's out there. I know that I can easily be a target of it. But I can't tell you that I have had an experience where I felt like racially profiled, right? And I think it's also because I live in a community where it's either Black or heavily Hispanic, right? So it's, I just think that and this is for, like, I guess for anything else, is like, I fight and I support things that I believe in, right? And I think this is something, when I talk about this conversation, is that I always offer as a support, and not just as a support as like kind of like in front of a camera, but kind of like that support in the real time, right? So whether it's walking to the protest, whether it's promoting the information to people to have an impact, in whatever situation may be, right? Because I think one of the things that we should take in consideration is, like, how can we be helpful in our realms, right? In our little pockets of reality. How can we be helpful, right? Because what may work in New York may not work in Texas. You know what I mean? What I say in Louisiana might not fly in Cali, right? So these are things that I think we should, like, think about when we're handling these conversations, and and what's our way to support or help those that are needing our help.
I definitely say, like, growing up, I spoke more of a proper way. Like, a lot of people's first impressions, like, when they first meet me, they say I'm fake Black because I'm speaking proper and I'm not putting on, like, that persona that they all see on TV or they see anywhere else, like on the media, or just me being out here just wilding, cursing all the time. Like, honestly, I really didn't even start cursing till like a year ago. Like, I was like so against it because I didn't want me to be portrayed as that, because that's not who I am. Like, I'm who I'm gonna be and who I want to be. So yeah, like, I mean, it is kind of hard to, like, explain, like, how I feel to other people, because, like, he's like Negro just said, like, other people they just can't relate. Like, they're just in their own bubble of their own, of how they grew up. So it's hard to explain it to them, but I just try to do the best I can and try to put them in my shoes as much as possible to make them feel where I came from and kind of sort of make them understand me.
And which is difficult, right? So I'm sorry, Louis, which is difficult, right? Because the reality is that, sometimes, you can describe something, perfectly to someone, sound effects, drop the entire scenario for them of being, singularly picked out because of the color of your skin, or because of the way your hair is styled, or because of the clothes you're wearing, or because of the words that you're using, to be singled out directly by that. my bad, I got a call. But to be singled out directly by that, it kind of, it's you could draw it, but at the end of the day, until you're not in that position, until you're not there, you don't know how fast your heartbeat's going. You don't know how you are actually thinking if you're ever going to make it out of there, And this is me describing it. I've never gone through it, right? So just imagine someone who's actually in the position where you're like your hairs are like actually getting up because you're getting anxiety. Now you can't breathe. Like there's just things that until somebody doesn't go through them, they're not going to be able to understand it, right? And I think like you said, your job sometimes is to kind of just provide them a picture of what it is. But the reality is that they're not going to feel it until they're there.
Yeah, no, and overall, I think that it's just the fact that even trying to explain our realities is so weird because it's who we've always been. So it's like how you put it into words. Like I don't know. It is just who I am. This is how I live. I've never known a different way, and I have no other option. So I think it just definitely goes back to representation, and particularly is because when you see media and literature, like white people and even to a certain point, brown Latinos have had this wealth of representation of storytelling that kind of gives them the experiences and allows them to step back, look at a screen and see this is how the life of someone like me plays out. This is how it works. And it kind of gives the power to verbalize that. But then when and particularly this is something that even as we have this identity is something that we're still learning. Because I actually just realized this last night as I was watching a show, that moment when you're represented and it feels so good because I think this is something real. This is something to me, or this is something that's happened to me before, or this even aspirational. This is something that I wish to accomplish, and I know that now it is possible for someone that looks like me. And I think overall, we could go talk on and on and on about different kind of ideas or elements that play a part into this movement, because I think all of them are interconnected and all of them are very important because all of them inform the way we live. But something that for me, in a sense, representation is so important because I grew up and the way that I related to my father was through watching movies. So if that's a language we speak, but we don't have necessarily something that represents the both of us in those screens, how do we even relate to each other? There's just that inherent fracture in the way that we communicate, just because we never saw someone on screen that looked like us, or that talked about our realities, or that allowed us to like I was saying before, take a step back and look at our lives play out from a different perspective. And just because I think education is incredibly important, but you can only educate when you have the language. And in a sense, languages are the weapons. It's the weapon that you can use to educate other people. So it's it can be challenging because we are kind of writing our story as we go, just because we haven't had that backup of representation.
Yeah, very true. So my last question actually was going to be whether or not you guys felt well represented in Latinx and in the Black communities. And I think, Louis, you answered that pretty well. And I also wanted to say, to note that you guys all are saying different things, all different ways, how it's difficult. It's hard to express how you guys feel in your identities. But is there any tools or besides media, like Louis was saying, or different ways that maybe you can have just people be more mindful of including your perspectives? Or how can you encourage people to be just more mindful, not just completely understand, but to be mindful of the fact that these intersectionalities exist?
I mean, I think it starts with these conversations like the one we're having right now. I think this is what kind of brings the topic up. This is what kind of now has people debating of whether they agree with what we said or not. And I think allowing each other to speak and to be heard, and to also, have people who might not agree with you, but at least they took the time to hear you out, right? And I think that's where it starts, right? The conversations, and sometimes these conversations, we need to have it with our families, as crazy as it sounds, right? Sometimes it's with our families that we need to have this conversation, because sometimes people are just stuck in their ways, you know what I mean? And as much as I'm saying stuck in their ways, I know I have ways that I'm stuck in too, right? But these conversations allow us to kind of have a dialogue of what things are accepted, what isn't represented, and how things should be done, right? And whether we agree with it or not, it's okay, right? But at least the conversation was there, which can, possibly one day open the door to somebody's thoughts and saying like, hey, you know what they said in, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, a month ago, it actually makes sense, right? So, and I think also people who are not being well represented, be patient with the people who don't quite understand you, right? Because it's really hard. It's like change, right? As much as we know that sometimes we need change, do we always want it? No, because we're comfortable, right? We like being in the position of knowing how things are and what is classified as what. And when something is changed, it kind of just puts us in a very kind of funky mood, right? And we don't really like that. So, when you have these conversations, be patient with the people that you're having it with. And as long as they're, listening to you and, respecting your perspective, whether they agree with it or not, I think that's the important.
I definitely would agree with Negro said. Like, it really does start at home. Like, if you think about it, like racism and all that, it starts from what you see growing up. It starts from what you have experienced growing up in your own household. So like if a grandparent or a parent is racist and that's all the kid sees their whole life, that's honestly the sad truth is like that's what they're gonna be. Unless they take the time to have those conversations with their family members and bring the light to it and make them change kind of. And you can change people, but to a certain extent, but you could put your effort out to make the change and have these combos. And even just talking to your friends and classmates, even if it's a simple stop in the hallway, like, hey, look, like, hello, like, I just want to have your opinion on this. Like, those go a long way to some people. Like, you never know what you can do to someone just by a simple conversation with them. And if those happen a lot more in communities, I feel like the exposure and other people's experiences, you will finally get to see their perspective of where they grew up and how they grew up and how they felt. So it really starts with communication. Like you have to talk. And if you're really a shy person, you don't like communication, get educated. Also, like Negro said, there's plenty of documentaries out here. There's plenty. We have the internet. Like that. Honestly, the internet has almost everything. Like you can educate yourself. And then once you educate yourself, then you have the information to pass it on to someone else. So it's big on communication.
Yeah. Overall, I think it's just to get to know other people. You need to get to also know yourself. I was particularly having this conversation with someone the other day of why just this knowledge and this awareness of, particularly when we have white allies, what accomplices, and they talk about the importance of getting to know what privilege is. Like, yes, when we ask you to be a part of a movement, we're asking you to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But how can you put yourself in someone else's shoes if you don't even know the shoes that you're wearing right now? So it's understanding of where you are, and just I just think that should always be the starting point. Getting to know yourself. Particularly if you're not Black, and getting to know where you are, so that you understand how you live and how your identities are portrayed in society, so that that way you can someone be who's able to look at how someone else's experiences are portrayed in society. And I think it's just also the fact that a lot of what we see when it comes to race in the media can be portrayed as a race war, which can sometimes be that, but I think like wars are not something that just start like this. I think that you can always break down race to something that's understandable, and particularly to like white parents, like your like children, and I know particularly this because like this was kind of like my major in at Davidson of like human development. Like children are ready to talk about race, regardless of what their race is. So if you start talking to them about race, like ever since they're children, they have like that awareness of there are people, there are like little friends that I have at school that might look a little bit different like me, and that sometimes means that there are parts of their culture and their identity that are different as mine, but that's okay. So we have that as a starting point, and we have an understanding of race, and I think that's the first thing we need to do in order to have a better world, because it's, even if we try to ignore and say like, oh, like children are not ready to talk about this thing until they grow up, it's like, well, no, like African American parents have had a discussion about race with their children for centuries now. So so like you know, like your children are ready, they're, trust them, they're gonna be big people later. So have those conversations. And to a certain point, it's just me, like me looking back, it's like I wish that is something that I had, particularly when I was a child, because like my dad was like very much aware of his blackness and how it influenced his life, but just in like within Latino culture, he didn't have these tools to communicate that to me. So I think that what's most important is to gather all these tools and educate and put all this forward, so that we have generations that are informed and educated and aware of our past, so that they can build a better future.
Definitely, Lewis. I think you said it greatly, that these kind of conversations just are just the beginning. And I think this is a really pivotal moment, and that we have to maximize this awareness, and to really first understand where you're coming from, and then you can understand where other people are coming from. I thought that was a very good point. I'd like to thank you guys for joining me today and to having this conversation. I know it's definitely not the easiest one to have, and we can hopefully use this to educate others, or just bring awareness, not to be the sole form of education, because we've been saying it time and again that there are different ways and that are better, and shouldn't just rely on people from that community to do all the heavy lifting. So yeah, I want to thank you guys all for joining me tonight and joining us. But yeah, does anyone have any like closing remarks?
First of all, thank you for extending the invitation and inviting me to be here with you guys. Right. I think this is actually one of the things that I actually appreciate a lot from the fraternity, when you get that random reach out of like, hey, listen, we're doing this, and we think you'd be great for that. But most importantly, I think let's be mindful of who we are, and I think Lewis really kind of really decorated that for everyone. Let's be mindful for who we are, so that we can know where to go, right? Because if we don't know where we're standing, I don't think we could really reach the goal that we want to achieve. But once again, thank you, George Ruiz, Negros Party, Holland.
Awesome.
I'll just also add, like Michael Jackson said it best, bro. If you want to make a change, it starts with the man in the mirror. Like, you have to change yourself first before you could change the world. And it's one step at a time. As I've said before, this Black Lives Matters move, it's not a trend, bro. Like, my life is not a trend. I don't know how to keep explaining that and putting pressure on that so much, because a lot of people think it is. Like, this is real, what we're going through, and we really have to keep pushing day in and day out, not let it die.
Yeah, sometimes I just think that something that's very powerful is to have like those conversations. And sometimes it's sad, but it's just the truth that sometimes like people, particularly who are like non-Black, POC, or white, like they don't have like that moment of realization until a person who they like, a Black person who they love very much, sits down and has that talk with them. But overall, like I have been able to see how people around me kind of finally, it's not like they all of a sudden know it all, but they have that realization of like, and that willingness to go a little bit beyond and understand where we are. And I think those moments are incredibly satisfying and rewarding. And even though it takes a particular person and it can be a lot of heavy lifting, I just invite all of our Black leaders to keep chasing those moments of understanding and of connection.
Awesome. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us. And I hope that this continues the conversation and sparks more change right now. So hope everyone has a great night. Thank you.